What's up, guys? On today's video, we're going to be talking specifically about Roger, the new meta shifter changing up the professional scene of professional play, and especially when it comes down to drafting, it can get a little bit hard, but not impossible to take out. So maybe you can learn a couple of things about the latest and greatest Roger gold lane to take advantage in your ranked game, or maybe in your 5-man parties to get some free stars. Now, let's have a look at the numbers, the overall numbers across multiple MPL regions, just to kind of have a good idea what it has to say about Roger being in the meta. Is it good? Is it bad? Well, don't worry, I have it here right for you guys. Starting off with the MPL MY Season 13, where we did see a bit of a shock when we saw SRG up against the Homeboys, first picking it on the week. Well, sorry, not first picking it, but picking it on the very first week itself against some teams like the Homeboys. Now, Roger currently at a 61.54% in terms of its win rate, which is showing that it's doing pretty good here in MY at the very least. It's been picked 13 times over these past 2 weeks, so a surprising number of games already being played. But that's not just, that's not all, right? This is just Malaysia. Let's hop over to Indonesia, where we start to see this, well, I wouldn't even say resurgence, but it started to pop out a little bit more prominently. Roger currently at a 55.56 win rate, 9 total games being played, and of course, we have to talk about MPL PH, because these guys coming up big time, slightly lower on the win rate, picked 11 times at 45.45%. Now, MPL PH is a little bit special because their numbers are dipping down in the Roger win rate, but I have to say they have adapted the fastest to this new dominant gold laner. So why do you want to play Roger gold lane? Well, if it suits your style of, I'm gonna win this lane so hard and snowball so far out of control that nobody can take me down, I think this might just be the pick for you. Because if we're talking about Roger, he's great at winning out his lanes. There's so many lane matchups where he has quite a significant advantage for a good amount of time. Secondly, he's able to rotate around the map really quick, changing between human and lichen form, both of which gives you a little bit of a dash, a little bit of a roll forward, on top of the fact that he can get some extra movement speed in human form, and you can even use the lichen pounce to kind of hop over to hostile minions, hostile creeps even, to close a little bit more of a distance when you're in the middle of that rotation, because his cooldowns are just that fast. Roger has so many things going for him, especially if you're the kind who is looking to play for your KDA and to find those critical moments to clean out fights. I mean, look at these clips coming in from BennyQT, right? What is being asked of him is completely different to what he used to play before. He used to play carry, wait in the bush, right place, right time, and then clean up a fight, or maybe even take a front to back. But now with Roger, this allows him to be very patient. Before we get into that one, I want to highlight the Roger crit build. The crit build is going to involve you having a little bit of attack speed, but more importantly, staying within human form to really abuse the crits that you have, to chunk them out, and then using the latter half of becoming into that lichen. You're not going to have as much damage until you have your third, maybe even fourth item sometimes, depending on the situation. But for a majority, this is a good amount of damage, especially with a high burst in that crit off of an auto attack, could really change a fight, especially when you're executing your opponents below 50% HP, because all of those numbers eventually stack up. Now, Sasa does a really good job, but there's nothing really much to, well, I would say, give an opinion on in this particular game, mainly because it was a clean stomp. I would say if you have the opportunity to go for the crit build on Roger, the easiest condition that you are looking for is having a significant lead over your opponent. You can always start with the Wind Talker. It is a good opener item. If you know when the power spikes are eventually going to hit later on down the line, and you probably won't be able to get away with the crit build, maybe consider going for the Thunderbelt build, which we're going to show you right now with BennyQT up against AP Bren, because I think this is a great highlight match, and especially if we're talking about the top of the top, these two teams, really, there is no comparison. They're looking so very good from a macro perspective, and as well as a micro perspective. Now, after re-looking at the clips that I had to take for specifically GideonQ, he actually decides to go for a different setup in his Emblem build. The one most commonly used obviously is going to be Master Assassin, and well, the tier 3 trait here kind of varies depending on the player. Sometimes we've seen attack speed, but most of the time we expect him to actually go for the Rupture with the adaptive attack that helps out in lane to scale his first abilities, but he also decides to go for Impure Rage. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I think it's a really good in-between the extremes of people who really want to win that lane, going for things like Weakness Finder, for an example, or go for a safer option in terms of Quantum Charge to be able to kite around their opponents in human form just a little bit more. I think that the Impure Rage is a good in-between the two. It gives you a little bit of sustainability in the lane because the mana is an issue. You have to juggle it. It's not like you're going to have the purple buff like you are in the jungle all the time, but now that you're in lane, you kind of have to like weigh out the cost and benefits. I think the Impure Rage kind of compensates for that while still adding a good amount of damage. Don't forget that Roger has really low cooldowns overall and multiple abilities to actually trigger the Impure Rage in the first place. Now let's talk a little bit more about Benny's role playing Roger in this situation against AP Bren, because his main job is to be a cleaner of team fights, and he's looking to try and neuter Super Marco as much as possible, pulling pressure towards his side of the map and opening up Samfer for maybe a couple of plays around Turtle side when the time comes. You can see that GideonQ is very much dedicated and doubling down on his current build, because he knows that just if Echo finds that one opportunity to chunk out multiple targets from the side of AP Bren, he could easily clean up that fight without having to think too much about it, assuming that number one, he wins out his lane, number two, he's able to actually get to the fight at the right time. In game 1 between Echo versus AP Bren, we do see an early pickup of Roger super early on in the game. It does put AP Bren in a bit of an awkward situation because, well, I would have to say that if we're talking about some of the best gold laners, no matter how much pressure they absorb, I feel like when we're listening to specifically AP Bren, oh, dude, can somebody take out Super Marco? He is disgusting. But even for a player like him, he opts to go for a Brody as a potential way to actually survive the lane and maybe even have a chance to actually win out in that lane itself. Now let's break down the overall build that we saw from GideonQ in all three of these games now that we kind of understand what his main role is supposed to be during these team fights from the laning phase up until the mid game. What we see from GideonQ is that he opts for a first item Windtalker, and he's not looking to get his boots as quick as he wants to, but ideally the Windtalker is going to be able to compensate for that. He'll think about the boots after he gets that first item power spike, because keep in mind, he not only wants to win the lane, but he wants to have control over the lane, how fast he's capable of pushing if his opponent decides to forcefully build up, freeze, and then set a massive wave coming down his way. The Windtalker helps a lot. The second item that he goes for is Endless Battle. This is a core item, and I think for anybody deciding to go for the Thunderbelt build, or even deciding for what GideonQ is building here today, being able to have empowered auto attacks just by pressing an ability is a very, very powerful mechanic for someone like Roger. Lots of abilities, lots of short cooldowns, right? CDR is always going to be very beneficial, but to be able to pump out true damage on top of it is why most people are going to lean into the Endless Battle no matter what. Only reason you want to take Thunderbelt is to double down on that extra bit of damage, have a little bit of a slow on-hit effect, on top of the fact that it does give you some mana to sustain in the lane, to pick and choose when you can fight and not have to worry too much about juggling the tax of mana every single time that you go for a trade. Now, after this, he decides to go for a third item, Malefic Roar. Now, for some people, this might be like, oh, why do I need to bring in my rank games? What if there isn't enough armor to justify? Then you can opt to skip it. But keep in mind that in this particular clip that we are seeing here from AP Bren versus Echo, his job is to finish off his targets, no matter the target. And I think Malefic Roar being able to cut through the number of anti-cuirasses being built from the side of AP Bren is definitely definitely a good solution, definitely a good way around it, especially if you're dealing with a high tier level of competition or opponents. He then does it again once more in game number 2, and that's when we really see the strength of the overall composition with Roger in it from the side of Echo. Because when we look at their draft and the way that they are enabling this Roger to actually play the game, well, a lot of it comes down to what does this composition want to accomplish, and a lot of that comes down with Dive. With now a composition where it's not asking Benny to be at the right place at the right time, he can be very patient with the way that he actually enters the fight, allowing the 4 of his team members to chunk out opponents and really diminishing their resources before we see Benny QT jump on in with the Like and Pounce to start cleaning up a lot of these fights. The only adjustment that we do see towards the end of that game itself, and it was a crazy series, by the way, don't get me wrong, was the fact that Super Marco decided to go, and this is one of the few ways to actually deal with this Roger later on, is to go for the Harith. Harith with a Thunderbelt.
And then for AP Brand, the item, of course, look at that. The Thunderbelt priority coming out from Super Marco. That's the reason why he was able to last against Benny QT in that lane. And Benny QT, we have already seen that he prioritizes the Windtalker. For the past 3 games, that was his item build-up. Then Super Marco just knew how to handle it, going for the Thunderbelt for a semi-defensive slash aggressive play. And all he needed to do was to call Ogwen onto that lane so that he can eventually win versus Benny QT.
And we also see an adaptation, well, I wouldn't even say an adaptation, but a double down on the build that Benny QT was going for, having the GDS, which is not exactly the most common item, but very easily procced on Roger, as well as the Malefic Roar. In some of these clips, even from my testing itself, it feels like I don't necessarily need the Malefic Roar in some of these situations. But in Benny QT's case, it's very different, especially in professional play where a lot of these people are going to find any type of advantage to take against you, especially when they're below 50% HP. Antias is a great item to actually be able to do so, to reduce the overall burst damage being received from the rest of Echo, on top of the fact that it might buy you just a little bit of extra time against the Roger. Now, that's not the only item that you have to take into mind when we're thinking about counterplay against Roger, because he does reset off of kills with the Like and Pounce. And to be able to do that, we have the exact clip right here where we do see that AP Brand goes insane with the purchase of a Winter Truncheon to be able to kind of deny that opportunity. Against the dive composition, kill time is everything. And if you're able to kind of slow it down, or at the very least for people who have kill resets and deny them the reset and force them to wait the full duration of the ability, is such a game changer for a team like AP Brand to be able to defend and eventually win out in game number 3. Finally, to wrap this all up, in case Roger has been a huge menace in your ranked games, I don't know what rank you guys are in, but who knows how popular this might actually be getting. If you want some form of counterplay, maybe consider a couple of these options. Number 1, Antias, if you are not fighting him in lane. It is useful to be able to have some physical reduction overall as a percentile rather than a flat number. Mainly because the on-hit effect is going to be really annoying, and to be able to reduce that number, having the Antias is definitely something that can help you out, especially if you're dealing with the chip damage and the poke in Roger's human form. Secondly, maybe opt to go for a Harith matchup and then look to first item Thunderbelt like we see Super Marco do right here. Now, he opts to go for the Thunderbelt because the one thing that Roger absolutely hates is to be slowed down. And there's multiple different ways of doing that. Being able to peel for yourself independently of your roamer is going to give you an advantage, because after that Like and Pounce, he's on top of you, and with Harith you're able to create distance for yourself. But with the second ability of Roger, whether in human form or in Lycan form, closing the distance ain't too difficult when you've got the movement speed to do so. So being able to have a on-hit slow effect after you use that Chrono Dash might be able to buy you those precious seconds when you drop your Xamarin Force and repeatedly do it again and again and again. Eventually you will edge out the Roger in just raw numbers, but keep in mind that in this particular game, it might not be the same situation for everybody out there, but by the end of it, Harith had a 3,000 gold lead at the very least. I gotta double check that again. But at the very least, you can understand where I'm coming from. Drop the Xammen Force and then utilize your Chrono Dashes as much as possible to not only give yourself that shield and fighting chance, but to also deter the Roger away without having to pick up a Vengeance. Finally, for those of you who don't want to build any of these items, Vengeance is a very simple solution to it. When he goes for the all-in, pop the Vengeance. You like and pounce, pop the Vengeance. I'm below 50% HP, pop the Vengeance. Every single time, the full duration of the Vengeance is going to deter a lot of Roger players for going for that all-in, or at the very least, wastes his abilities because of the overall damage reduction you get from the Vengeance. It's less about the on-hit. I mean, it's nice to have the on-hit, but even if you take away the on-hit, it still doesn't change the fact that you are alive thanks to one cooldown, one spell, one battle spell. And that's it for today's video. Tell me what Roger is like for you in your games. Has this video helped you out? Would you like more videos of this sort? Also, don't forget that you can actually like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit that notification bell right next to the subscribe button. And if you do, I will donate you a car. Yep. That's the deal. That's the deal that I'm making up right now. That's what we're gonna go with. With that being said, hopefully y'all enjoyed the video. Make sure you can come along for the streams on Wednesdays. That's our weekly streams, and the MPL After Hours, where we record a podcast live on stream every single Monday, or we're trying to do every single Monday as hard as we can. It's getting people is tough. Getting people is tough. With that being said, we'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye. Scratching my butthole and sniffing my fingers. Check if I have HIV.